In a world that rewards constant communication, incessant sharing, and performative transparency, we've forgotten one of the most powerful tools in human interaction: strategic silence. While everyone else is busy announcing their intentions, broadcasting their thoughts, and revealing their strategies, the truly effective operator knows when to shut up and uses that silence as a weapon. Niccolò Machiavelli, the 16th century Florentine philosopher and political theorist, understood this principle better than most. Though he's famous for his explicit advice in The Prince, Machiavelli's most potent insights often concern what should remain unsaid. "The vulgar crowd always is taken by appearances," he wrote, recognizing that speech creates appearances, while silence preserves reality. In an age of oversharing, those who master strategic silence don't just protect their position, they achieve what constant communicators cannot. They win, while others are still talking about winning. Machiavelli lived in an era of political intrigue where careless words could lead to exile or execution. But even in our less lethal modern context, unnecessary speech creates vulnerabilities that silence avoids. Men in general judge more by the eyes than by the hands, Machiavelli observed. For everyone can see, but few can feel. The person who speaks constantly offers everyone opportunities to see and judge while revealing little about what can actually be felt or known. Every word you utter carries costs that silence doesn't. First, speech creates commitments. When you declare intentions, you bind yourself to them in others' eyes. Change course, and you appear inconsistent or dishonest. Remain silent about your plans, and you maintain the freedom to adapt without explanation or apology. Second, speech exposes your thinking process and limitations. The more you explain, the more you reveal about how your mind works, information others can use to predict, manipulate, or counter you. As Machiavelli noted, the first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. Similarly, the first method for estimating someone's strategic capacity is to listen to how much they unnecessarily reveal. Third, and perhaps most importantly, compulsive speech diminishes your mystique and authority. It is far safer to be feared than loved, Machiavelli famously wrote. Fear requires distance, and distance requires some degree of mystery. The leader who explains every decision, justifies every action, and shares every thought becomes ordinary, and the ordinary cannot command the same respect as the extraordinary. Consider how this plays out in modern contexts. The colleague who speaks in every meeting, weighing in on every issue regardless of expertise, gradually loses impact. The friend who shares every detail of their life on social media becomes predictable rather than interesting. The negotiator who fills uncomfortable silences with concessions gives away leverage. The leader who responds to every criticism legitimizes the critics while diminishing their own stature. Machiavelli would view our modern compulsion toward transparency and constant communication not as authenticity, but as strategic malpractice, a voluntary surrender of power that provides others information without securing equivalent value in return. In every instance, the person who talks too much makes themselves predictable and ultimately weak. But Machiavellian silence isn't just about keeping quiet. It's about being strategic with when and how you speak. It takes different forms depending on the objective, and understanding these distinct types of silence reveals how this approach operates in practice. First, there is information-gathering silence. The wise man does at once what the fool does finally, Machiavelli wrote. The fool speaks immediately, revealing their position while learning nothing about others. The wise person remains silent initially, allowing others to expose their thoughts, intentions, and weaknesses before deciding how to respond. This approach creates an asymmetric information advantage. While others reveal their thinking, you collect valuable intelligence without reciprocating. In negotiations, this manifests as the powerful principle that whoever speaks first loses. In relationships, it explains why the person who listens more than they speak often understands the dynamics better than the constant talker. In competitions, it's why those who announce their strategies before executing them typically underperform relative to their capabilities. Second, there's authority-building silence. Machiavelli understood that power depends partly on perception, and perception can be enhanced through calculated reticence. A prince must imitate the fox and the lion, he wrote, for the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. Part of the fox's cunning is knowing when speech diminishes rather than enhances authority. Authority-building silence works because humans naturally fill information gaps with assumptions that often favor the silent party. When a leader speaks selectively, addressing only significant issues rather than every minor concern, their words carry greater weight. When someone responds to criticism only when truly necessary, rather than defensively answering every charge, they project confidence rather than insecurity. This is why the most powerful figures in any domain typically speak less, but more deliberately, than those beneath them. The nervous junior executive overtalks. The CEO makes brief, decisive statements. The insecure person explains at length. The secure person states without justification. Third, ambiguity-preserving silence is another powerful form of strategic silence. As Machiavelli observed, it is safer to be feared than to be loved, when one of the two must be lacking. This famous observation extends beyond fear and love to all situations where maintaining multiple interpretations serves strategic interests. Ambiguity-preserving silence allows others to project their own hopes, fears, and interpretations onto your position. By refusing to clarify, you can simultaneously appeal to different constituencies with contradictory expectations. You maintain freedom of action by not committing to specific interpretations. You preserve deniability by not explicitly endorsing any particular understanding. Politicians master this approach by making statements vague enough that different audiences hear what they want to hear. Effective negotiators use it by avoiding clear positions that would prematurely narrow potential agreements. Leaders employ it by articulating vision without unnecessarily constraining implementation details. In each case, strategic silence isn't deception. It's the recognition that premature clarity often undermines rather than advances objectives. Beyond its tactical advantages, Machiavellian silence exerts powerful psychological effects that speech cannot achieve. Silence creates projection spaces. Human minds instinctively fill informational voids, often in ways that reflect their own preoccupations rather than reality. When you remain silent at key moments, others project their fears, hopes, or assumptions onto that silence, revealing their position while you maintain yours. As Machiavelli noted, men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions. The strategic use of silence leverages this tendency without requiring active deception. This explains why skilled interrogators use silence rather than questions to elicit information from reluctant subjects. The discomfort of silence compels the subject to fill the void, often revealing more than direct questioning would. The same dynamic operates in negotiations. where the side that tolerates silence typically secures better terms than the side that nervously fills pauses with concessions. Silence also establishes dominance in communication dynamics. The person who speaks first, most frequently, or at greatest length, subtly positions themselves as seeking approval or validation from listeners. The person who speaks less, more selectively, or only after others have committed to positions, implicitly claims the judge's role rather than the supplicant's. Machiavelli would recognize this as an expression of his principle that it is better to be feared than loved. The silent party is not necessarily loved, but their restraint often commands a respect that volume cannot. Silence also creates mystique that amplifies perceived power. As Machiavelli observed, men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see, to few to feel. What cannot be fully seen or understood often appears more formidable than what is completely exposed. The person who reveals everything, their thinking, motives, insecurities, plans, becomes ordinary. The person who reveals selectively retains an element of mystery that magnifies their perceived capabilities. Modern culture often treats transparency as an unqualified virtue and silence as suspicious. Just be authentic, we're told. Share your truth. Communicate openly. Yet this advice, while well-intentioned, contradicts Machiavelli's strategic insights about power and influence. The promise of transparency often demands binding oneself to past declarations, which undermines present interests. The modern fetishization of transparency creates a voluntary constraint on future action in service of present authenticity. Machiavelli's approach wasn't about dishonesty, but about selective disclosure, sharing what advances objectives while withholding what doesn't. In contemporary terms, this might translate to never attempting to win by unnecessary disclosure, but winning by strategic silence. The transparent person becomes predictable, manipulable, and ordinary, qualities that undermine rather than enhance influence. The transparency trap manifests in various contexts. In professional settings, it appears as the impulse to share works in progress before they're ready for evaluation, to voice half-formed opinions in meetings, or to reveal negotiating positions before understanding the other side's constraints. In personal relationships, it emerges as premature emotional disclosure, unnecessary confessions of past errors, or detailed sharing of future plans, still subject to change. Machiavelli would view these behaviors not as authenticity, but as strategic mistakes that surrender power without securing commensurate benefits. In the modern world, the master of strategic silence doesn't maintain complete secrecy, but creates a contrast between what is revealed and what remains private. The key isn't in never speaking, but speaking only when speech serves your objectives better than silence. This discipline of silence is about controlling the flow of information, maintaining authority, and amplifying influence in ways that can't be achieved through constant chatter.